Now welcome to another edition of Battle of the Heroes and Villains, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll for Snoke. We'll then compare those results to all the other characters we've done thus far, before I then read and respond to some of your comments. But before any and all that, you can already head down and nominate or vote for which character we do next by responding to my pinned comment below or leaving a thumbs up if someone else has already nominated a character you want to see. Whatever single comment gets the most votes in the next 24 hours will be the winner and the character we do next. Alright, and now on to the results for Supreme Leader Snoke, where we'll see that 1% of voters gave him an A, 2% gave him a B, 11% went with the C tier, 27% then gave him a D, and a final 59% gave Snoke an F. And so when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, that means Snoke ends up with an average score of 1.59, which puts him into 64th place overall, or second to last, only 0.09 of a point ahead of Admiral Holdo for the current worst character in all of Star Wars. And yes, I will give my usual disclaimer when doing sequel characters that I am not a very pro-sequel trilogy channel, and thus my audience tends to be not very pro-sequel trilogy either. So another channel who loves the sequels and does nothing but praise them and has an audience who loves them as well. Snoke may do somewhat better, he certainly would do somewhat better, but how much is the big question? How much of a character is Snoke really? How good of a character is he really? I don't know that if we are being as objective as possible that Snoke would finish all that much higher than he did, considering the way he is used in the sequel trilogy, which is, of course, what we're going to be discussing in a moment. But first, let me once again just say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches these videos, especially to those of you who do comment, who do take the time. There were like 1,400 of them on this poll, so obviously I cannot read each and every one of them in the video. And some that were really, really good, really, really well thought out, and deserve to be in the video are, of course, going to be left on the proverbial cutting room floor. Don't take it personally. I do try to read each and every single comment. I read probably 90% of them on this poll. Again, there were a lot of them. So just, again, don't take it personally. Love all the comments. Please keep them coming. And I try to include as many as I can in the videos. All that said, let's kick it off as we always do with the top rated comment, which once again this week came to us from Blue Diamond Director, who had the top comment last week. So well done on your Star Wars commentary here. Anyway, they had this to say. I remember people saying, you don't need his backstory, the Emperor didn't get one in the OT, but my counter has always been, yes, we wouldn't need Snoke's backstory if The Force Awakens was the first Star Wars movie, but it isn't. It's the 7th movie in the franchise. In an established universe, we would wonder where he was during the events of the previous movies. All they had to do was say he was hiding in the Outer Rim, watching the galaxy tear itself apart across 2 wars, and then he waited for the galaxy and New Republic to become complacent with 30 years of relative peace before striking. That's it. Nice and simple. Instead, JJ created him with no intention of answering the question and forced other writers to do that. That's his storytelling style, it seems. And then Ryan decided to kill him off as a spiteful move against the fans and their theories. Seriously, the guy is so bitter for Star Wars, which forced JJ to come up with a lazy explanation of him as just a vessel of Palpatine created in a lab. Wasted potential of villain due to incompetent writers who only cared about mystery boxes and subverting expectations. Alright, so once again, great comment this week. I can see why so many people thumbs it up, and you're absolutely right, because there's a really, really big difference, a huge difference between starting a story and continuing it. And though they each obviously have their own set of difficulties, hooking someone with something completely new, making them initially care about your story, it's never easy, as it's not easy to continue a story in an intriguing and meaningful way, especially one that had a definitive ending. Basically, if you're going to do that, if you're going to continue a story, the burden falls upon you, the writer, to justify and explain the need for a continuation. But anyway, before I get more into that, the thing is, the viewer or the reader of your story, or whatever it might be, they're generally going to be much more forgiving of lack of explanation or backstories when a story begins, as long as the characters or the characterization is really good and they get vested in the characters, which I think we can safely say happens in Star Wars, or A New Hope as we tend to call it today. Most people, they're going to be okay with and give you the benefit of the doubt about the bigger story, And oftentimes they prefer more mystery and less explanation at the beginning of a story. In fact, too much explanation or exposition can sometimes lose people if you heap it on too early and too often about a fictional universe before they have a reason to care about that fictional universe. You're much, much better off trying to get your audience to care about your characters, the characters themselves, so that through those characters, or because of those characters, they begin to care about the greater story or the greater world or galaxy or whatever it is that these characters inhabit. And Star Wars, the original trilogy, is a perfect example of how you do that. We initially come to care about the Star Wars galaxy itself, about defeating the Empire and restoring the Jedi Order, not because we care about those things initially in and of themselves, but because we care about the characters who care about those things. We want to see them accomplish those things. We want to see Luke Skywalker restore the Jedi Order because we care about Luke. But eventually, if a storyteller does their job correctly, we also come to care about all of it, about the Jedi, about the Republic, about the galaxy itself, about understanding it and immersing ourselves in it further. And clearly George Lucas understood that. He knew when he made the prequels he'd have to explain things that we were willingly and happily kind of taking for granted in the original trilogy. He knew that the same formula he used with the original trilogy would not work again if he wanted to continue or expand the story. Things like how exactly Anakin Skywalker fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader would have to be explained, as with things like what happened to the Jedi, why were they all but extinct, and why are only Obi-Wan and Yoda still around and in exile, and who is the Emperor, how did he take control of the galaxy, that also will need to be explained. These are all things we grew to become interested in because of, again, how much we cared about those characters in the first story. We wanted to know more about the galaxy itself now. And then we got the prequels, which, of course, explained much about the galaxy and the Force and how it all came to be. And so then when the sequel trilogy came around, most of us fans wanted even more of that. We wanted to understand why this story was happening, why the sequels needed to be told, why it was continuing after a seemingly happy resolution that we got at the end of Return of the Jedi, where we feel pretty safe assuming that Luke will create a new Jedi Order, that the New Republic will rise from the ashes of the fallen Empire. However, those things don't happen. Luke fails to rebuild the Jedi Order, and the Empire, or the new version of it we call the First Order, it manages to prevail and to take out the New Republic in literally one shot. And the reason those things seem to happen, the one behind all of this, the cause for another trilogy, is Snoke. He apparently has turned Ben Solo to the dark side, and that was somehow what caused Luke to give up on the Jedi and to essentially go into exile himself. And this First Order that he is the supreme leader of, which seems like it is literally the Empire 2.0, they again destroyed the New Republic after building yet another superweapon that no one knew about. This, again, is all done by Snoke. And so, go figure, we want to know who this guy is, where he comes from, what he is. How did he accomplish all of this? How is he responsible for undoing everything the last part of the story ended and resolved in a highly satisfying way, not just for our heroes, but us, the audience? Like I said a minute ago, there is a burden upon you, the writer or author, if you want to continue a once-finished story. You have to justify and explain the need or cause for the continuation of the story. You have to let us know how things went wrong and why things went wrong, why the story will go on. And again, in the sequel trilogy, the reason behind it, besides Disney wanting money, the reason behind it in story is Snoke. Alright, let's now move on to some more comments, and I'll try to keep my responses to them relatively short so we can squeeze in as many as possible within a reasonable amount of time for this video. Anyway then, let's get to this one from Greg Elchert, who said, I actually liked him in The Force Awakens. He was opulent where the Emperor was plain, calm where the Emperor was hammy, and he actually seemed to care about Ren and Hux instead of ditching them the second they became inconvenient. Then The Last Jedi turned him into a shouting caricature of the Emperor, and much worse, completely wasted Andy Serkis's talents. Then we also have this one from Anthony Casale, who said, Snoke gets an F because more than any other character, he embodies the fact that there was no cohesive plan for the sequel trilogy, and no matter what you say, him being a clone controlled by Palpatine was never the original intended arc for him. Just thinking about him reminds me of how bad the sequels were and gets my blood boiling. Also then, there was this comment from Javier Ramirez who said, The Force Awakens had a possible chance to make an epic villain, But since there was no plan, Snoke was killed in the second movie without any fanfare. The fact that he has or was nothing more than a deformed clone of Palpatine just added salt in the wound. Disney really should have used George Lucas's guidelines. F rank without a doubt. We also then have this one from Keely Morgan, who said, his introduction in The Force Awakens was great. He was huge, menacing, and intriguing enough to make audience members want to know more. His literal butchering in The Last Jedi destroyed all the menace and intrigue built up, and his subsequent flimsy backstory as a clone created by Palpatine was the final nail in the coffin. F. And then there's also this one from Jackson W, who said, D. I will never forget how excited the fandom was in speculating his origin after The Force Awakens. So many terrific ideas of some long forgotten evil, a power in the Force that went beyond politics into something arcane and different, only for the potential to end in a saber to the torso for him and an almighty slap to the face for the fans. And like I was saying before, when a story begins, people are willing to and eager to accept a mystery, and The Force Awakens absolutely benefited from that quite a bit. And yes, I realize it is part 7 of 9, but it is also the beginning of a new trilogy. Anyway, at that time, when The Force Awakens came out 6 years ago now, which seems hard to believe. Anyway, when it first came out, pretty much everyone was okay with it, not initially giving us answers to questions about Snoke, Rey, and all these other things, because they figured there was a grand plan in place, that they had thought about and mapped out all of this, that Snoke was cleverly thought out, where he came from, how he rose to power and turned Ben Solo and essentially defeated Luke. That had all been carefully considered, and us fans thought we would eventually get those answers. But it turns out they, or JJ, who I'm left to assume is the one who created Snoke or created the idea for him, he didn't know anything about Snoke, it seems. He just threw him out there, he just introduced him and passed him on to Rian Johnson, who then killed him off without realizing just how important this guy, this character was to the story, that we needed to know something about him, because again, he is the reason why the story is continuing. And yet, we get virtually no answer about who he is, where he came from, other than some very generic answer in The Rise of Skywalker, where we see him in a vat and hear Palpatine say that he created him. Okay, and moving on now, we have this comment from the Paladin author YouTube, who said, when they took away the possibility he was some kind of dark force-using giant of a mysterious ancient race, they eliminated the most interesting possibility about him. Honestly, the giant hologram held so much promise. We also then have this one from Wilder Way, who said, while I wish his death was handled better in The Last Jedi, my problem lies more with how Rise of Skywalker completely retconned the history he'd been given in the official books and merchandise, just so we could have a contrived explanation for Palpatine's return. He wasn't an ancient dark side being predating the Sith anymore. He was just some test tube meat puppet. Perfect example of how not to subvert expectations. And quite honestly, trying to explain Snoke was one of the most important things they needed to do when you consider Return of the Jedi ends with the Force in balance, which means no more dark side users. So where does Snoke come from? What is he if 30 years ago in the story it ended with, of course, the Force in balance and no more Sith or no more dark side users in general? And this is where I thought they were actually going to do something very creative. Perhaps they could have gone the Plagueis route. Somehow he survived and he's laying so low that he just doesn't cause imbalance. I know that might sound a little silly, but certainly there was a way to do that. Someone who is trying to cling on to life is literally just still alive and clinging on to life with all he has. And then somehow after Palpatine dies, he is able to rise back to power, to snatch the dark side back from him. Again, maybe it sounds silly, but it is better than what we got. I also figured perhaps he was somehow just the manifestation of the dark side itself, that what the trilogy was going to attempt to do was to kind of put an end to the dark side or users of the dark side in some sort of way, which again, you could say sounds a little silly and a little ridiculous, but I thought he would be, and it was hinted at in Aftermath, I think, when Palpatine was sensing this dark side presence out in space, that this was somehow the manifestation of the dark side himself, that he was the dark side, and that somehow our heroes, our new Jedi Order, was going to defeat him, and then we could have this feeling like, once and for all, the dark side has been defeated until the next time it arises. Even though, yes, I realize everything I just kind of explained or described is pretty redundant, considering Return of the Jedi ends with the assumption that the dark side has been defeated or that all dark side users have been dealt with. Alright, and now let's move on to just a few final comments before wrapping this up. But again, let me just say thank you to everyone who comments. I am sorry I couldn't get to more of them, but I do tend to ramble. Anyway, let's begin with this one from Sean Mullen, who said, Snoke had a solid start in The Force Awakens. He was a mysterious character with horrible scars that imply a greater backstory. The Last Jedi happened. I actually give credit to the writers for subverting expectations by killing him off. It made me think that maybe they weren't going for a worse version of the original trilogy after all. They also failed to give a single iota of backstory for Snoke before killing him off. And of course, Rise of Skywalker gives us the Snoke in the jar backstory, which is just pitiful. It's very easy to tell that the writers had no idea where to go after The Last Jedi, and it very much shows in the treatment of Snoke. Definitely a D tier. Then we also have this one from Raul Alexandre, who said, Gotta give it credit for being such an ominous presence in the first movie of the sequels. Was really looking forward to his part in these subsequent movies, which of course didn't happen. Gotta give him some points for design, casting, and presence, but sadly, not for long. That's a D for me. Also here we have this one from Pawar LOS, who said, They built him up as an incredibly powerful darkside user, and then Rian Johnson literally threw him away and acted like we were stupid for expecting more. F. Moving on then, we have this one from MyQuest84, who said, Let's just say he was so forgettable as a villain that 65 characters into this series and we are just now voting on the character who was teased as the big bad for almost 2 full movies. Then this one from Mr. Star Wars, who said, It's telling when almost no one voted A. And this one from Minty Mint, who said, At the start he looked like something new and pretty interesting, but he was killed like it was nothing, so he became so irrelevant to the story in the end that removing him entirely probably would have not made any difference to the overall story in the end. Moving on to something a little more positive then, we have this one from Hellion Soul, who said, I'm giving him a B. To be honest with myself, I liked his character when I went to see the movies in theaters, as he was mysterious and menacing. The only times I was actively interested in The Last Jedi were when Snoke or Kylo Ren were on screen. He had that sick Force lightning ricochet off the ground and hit Ben Solo, which was something interesting and fun. I was initially shocked when he got killed, but it didn't take me out of it at all. Dark side users have been known to get tunnel vision as they consider themselves so superior and untouchable. I'm cherry picking my grade from the first 2 sequels, as by the time the 3rd sequel movie was out, I wasn't really invested anymore. All that being said, add Snoke up to the list of disappointments from the sequels. The mystery before his arrival was forgivable as it was enticing. The lack of development to his character is not easily so forgiven. Alright, and moving on, we have this one from Eli G, who said, Is it right to even call Snoke a character? He was a prop used by Palpatine who was thrown aside halfway through the trilogy, and a prop used by Disney to try and pretend they had an actual plan for the sequels. There's just nothing there to grade him on. He was worthless in the end. An F from me. Then there's this comment from Duh, who said, Out of all the ratings for characters you do on this channel, I swear to God, it never occurred to me that this character was missing because that's how forgettable he was. And then there's this one from Caleb, who said, Wait, he's a character? I thought he was just a cookie-cutter villain grown in a jar, both in-universe and out-of-universe. Also here we have this one from A Straight Black Man, who said, He's literally a hollow character, both in terms of his post-mortem physique and in terms of his character design. You can't get any more surface level outside of Snoke. And finally here we have this comment from S. Fisher 1993, who said, Of all the missed golden opportunities in this trilogy, this might be the biggest, yes, even more than Finn. I couldn't believe how mishandled Snoke was. They introduced him as someone larger than life, the man who broke the Skywalker family, turning Ben, causing Luke's Jedi to fall, and plunged the galaxy back into chaos via the First Order. He had potential to be a nasty villain, and indeed his first hologram scene shows us a very creepy, unsettling figure, thanks to Andy Serkis, who never disappoints. The hype around who he was just unreal, and I and many others were hoping he was a resurrected Plagueis. Instead, we got a complete joke. Instead of giving us some juicy insight on him in The Last Jedi, they decided to just kill him for the sake of subverting expectations. Dank Ferrick, I hate that phrase now. With that done, you deprive us of any hope we had, and you completely screw over any chance of him getting a shining moment to show off his nastiness. This decision is even more redundant thanks to The Rise of Skywalker. Why make a big show out of killing Snoke if you're just going to stick a resurrected Palpatine in his place? Had he been Plagueis, it would have raised the stakes quite a bit. Hard to win a war knowing the guy who trained the orchestrator of the last 2 wars is in charge, but obviously that's not what we got. Snoke is a joke, rated F, just another misstep in a trilogy full of them. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think of Snoke or what I or anyone else had to say about him in this video. Or you can of course nominate and or vote for which character we do next. Either way, you know what to do. Leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.